fact of reality is that just because something is good doesn't mean it's going to be successful. A great example of that is the Disney animated film Treasure Planet.
I can still remember sitting in a movie theater as a kid and seeing a teaser for this. It was barely even a trailer, it was really just a scene from the movie showing off its cool and creative visual design, attitude, and sense of adventure. I begged my dad to take me to see it when it hit theaters, and when I finally got to see it with my own eyes, 8-year-old me was blown away. Too bad that wasn't the story for everyone, as Disney kind of screwed over their own movie through poor marketing and a stubborn ploy to move their studio towards 3D animation. If you want to know more about that, I'd suggest you check out this video here. Still, whether it's been recognized for its qualities and heart or not,
Hollis.
I loved the movie, and this has been my all-time favorite Disney film ever since. Of course, the game industry kinda had a thing for adapting anything that even sneezed in the general direction of the silver screen into an interactive experience, so you could be sure that as soon as I discovered that there was a game based on Treasure Planet, I did everything in my power to let my parents know how bad I wanted it. Oh, my poor, poor parents. I love you guys. That Christmas, my sister and I got several games, including Dance Dance Revolution, Activision Anthology, Tetris Worlds, which is a really weird game. Maybe I'll make a video about that one day. Pro Pinball.
A trauma for another day.
And of course, oh wait, that's the wrong game. Treasure Planet, leading us to the subject of today's video. All nostalgia aside, is this game any good? Was it able to capture the fun and adventure from the film it's based on? And was it able to sidestep the unfortunate pattern of bad video game adaptations of movies?
So, grab your maps, set your sails, and let's take a look at Treasure Planet for the PlayStation 2.
The game was released in November of 2002 alongside the film and was developed by a company known as Bizarre Creations, who are responsible for a couple of games like Blur, Fur Fighters, and 007 Bloodstone. There's a short documentary video showcasing some behind-the-scenes details on the game's creation, and I'll provide a link to it in the description if you're at all interested. The audio and visual quality have not aged well, but it's still worth a look. Man, this documentary just reeks of early 2000s. The plot of the game is taken right from the film, as you can imagine. It's a sci-fi fantasy reimagining of the novel Treasure Island, written by Robert Louis Stevenson? Whatever. Originally published in 1882. The idea was to take the basic premise of the young man Jim Hawkins acquiring a treasure map from an old sailor and going on an adventure to find the buried loot of the legendary pirate Captain Flint. The twist with Treasure Planet is, of course, that the adventure doesn't take place across the seas, but rather among the stars, while still maintaining the aesthetic of the classic nautical tale, blending together in a unique and mesmerizing visual design. So yeah, a lot of aliens, space gear, and a neat device known as a solar surfer that Jim rides around on for fun were thrown in to add a bit of that fantasy and sci-fi flair that would help set the film apart from its literary inspiration. This concept is taken in some interesting directions, as familiar ideas from the original novel are given a bit more of a science fiction spin, like how John Silver doesn't just have a leg missing, but is a fully fledged cyborg, or how the marooned man Ben, who was left on his own on Flint's Island, is now a robot who's quite literally lost his mind. One of my favorite ideas, though, comes in the form of John Silver's pet. In the book, it's a parrot, which are well known for repeating spoken phrases, and so I'm guessing that the team working on the film decided that a neat spin on this might be a creature that not only mimics voices, but also their appearances, giving birth to Morph. Now, while the game does derive its plot from the film it's based on and even uses clips from the film to establish certain locations and events, a lot of details are skipped, like Billy Bones and how he got the map to Jim in the first place, or much more crucially, the relationship that formed between Jim and Silver that served as the heart of the whole movie. Silver and Jim still have several nice interactions throughout the game, but they're all quite brief and can't hope to reach the levels of what the film achieved with their characters. So, when we begin the game, we're given a quick rundown on how the dangerous pirate Captain Flint once pillaged ships all across the galaxy and would mysteriously vanish into thin air after every raid. Nobody knew how he was able to escape like this, but legends say that he would always retreat to Treasure Planet, a place where he would stash the loot of 1,000 worlds. Jim Hawkins, a young man living on a planet called Montresor, he and his friend Dr. Doppler discover that the map device creates portals that can be used to travel among several different worlds, but in order to activate new portals and find their way to Treasure Planet, Jim must perform certain tasks at each of the locations they find themselves in and activate these ancient beacons. After activating enough beacons, new portals will open up and the crew will be able to find their destination. The tasks that the player must perform will range from collecting all of the gold doubloons scattered throughout each level, completing races on the Solar Surfer, or some other random test depending on the stage. This actually isn't a bad setup for a game, but it does bring up one major question. Why even have a ship for this mission? Or a crew, for that matter? It makes sense in the film, but that's because the characters don't discover that the portals Flint used to disappear even existed until the end of the movie, and it's played up like a pretty big reveal. In the game though, the portals are there from the get-go and seem to be the only thing they need to travel from place to place, so the ship really isn't needed. Like, sure, they need it in the game because it's in the movie, but whatever, I'm just nitpicking at this point. So that establishes how the game is set up, but how is it played? Well, the idea of collecting beacons to progress might already be reminding you of a few different games, but the controls are enough to give away exactly what game Treasure Planet is either inspired by or ripping off, depending on how cynical you want to be about it. I made the joke earlier, but yeah. Treasure Planet on the PlayStation 2 plays an awful lot like Jak and Daxter, which was released just a year prior on the same system. And I don't just mean doing and collecting stuff to unlock beacons, though it does still have a really similar feel to collecting power cells in Jak and Daxter. But even moving around and attacking feels pretty dang similar. The jumps, the kicks, the punches, it's all pretty note for note. Are you seeing this? Too bad it's missing that great rolling jump move from Jak and Daxter. That was always one of my favorite moves to pull off. It's also a lot more broken up than Naughty Dog's game. Jak and Daxter had all of its levels connected together, creating a sense of unity, but Treasure Planet's levels are much more split apart, akin to something like Super Mario 64. But I actually think it works fairly well here. Jim also has a companion like Jak, but unlike Daxter, Morph is actually pretty useful in-game. By jumping and then pressing the attack button, Morph will turn into a hammer that Jim uses to smash anything below the duo, but he's actually capable of quite a bit more than that. By stepping on these activation pads, Morph can transform into a variety of tools like cyborg arms that can smash through specific crates and doors, a glider to move over wide gaps or even over long stretches of terrain, boots that help Jim run faster and even on top of lava, a jetpack to reach higher ground, and
what in oblivion is that?
oh no, that's barbaric. Like, Morph, buddy, I know we gotta pull that lever over there, but there's gotta be a better way than turning into that creepy hand from Majora's Mask. Like, who thought this was a good idea? Oh! These transformations are all timed, and the limit usually lasts just long enough to complete whatever mission is associated with the beacon that you need to activate. Situational? Sure, but a lot of these abilities would just crack the game's structure in half if you could just run around with them all willy-nilly, so I don't hold that against the game. The way these missions and puzzles are all split up are fairly well paced too, as are the levels themselves. In fact, you're never going to find yourself faced with a beacon challenge that you can't complete. As you progress through a level, missions will appear, and you'll always have everything you need to finish them when they're presented to you. Now, there are some missions that will span the whole course of the level, such as collecting all of these little green energies. This is a fine mission type in and of itself, but what I find a little annoying about them is that when you die while collecting these suckers, they reset, meaning that if you're working your way through an area or on the godforsaken circumstance that you find one of these missions spread throughout a whole level and miss your footing during some platforming, you will have to go back and collect all of these stupid green turds all over again. Now, if you find yourself at the end of a level missing some collectibles or beacons, it won't be too difficult to find what you're missing because each level is designed in a looping structure, which I greatly appreciate. This also helps with continuing the game since you can't return to the level select without using the portal at the beginning of the level. But seeing as you'll always be led back to that area by the end of each stage, it really couldn't be any more convenient. There's a little bit of combat as well, but it's not really all that in-depth, and thankfully, it's not too intrusive either. There will be some pirates to take out in each level, and thankfully, they actually went the extra mile to create new designs for some of the later levels in the game, which I really do appreciate, but they're really not much of a challenge. Like, honestly, the hardest any of these enemies is gonna be is maybe like punching them 3 times. Some of them get a little more complicated when they start to disappear and run around for a little little bit, but as soon as you see them again, they're basically dead unless you aren't paying enough attention. Now that's all for the on-foot gameplay, but there was an element of the film that the developers simply couldn't resist adding into the game, and that would be the Solar Surfer. Jim's awesome recreational mode of transportation was all over the marketing for the movie, and it's honestly such a cool looking device. It would have been a real missed opportunity not to include it in the game, especially since it helped set it apart from the game that inspired its design so much, even though Jack would get a hoverboard of his own the very next year in Jack 2. Actually, now that I think about it, a lot of game characters in the PlayStation 2 era ended up with skateboards or hoverboards or something. Jak and Daxter, Sora, Ratchet and Clank, Sonic, even Klonoa. What a weird trend, but I'm getting off topic here.
Rocket power!
There's several levels split up throughout the game where Jim will ride his Solar Surfer and activate beacons by completing tasks just like he does on foot, but with missions that fit the faster paced nature of the vehicle. So you've got some races and chases and even a couple of places where you have to rake up some points by performing all of the 2 tricks you can actually pull on this thing, but also by collecting dribloons and green energies just like before. There's a good amount of variety in all the levels too, so you've got the industrial mines of Montresor, the lush green forests of Treasure Planet, and even the broken asteroid field surrounding the black hole the crew encounters. In terms of visuals, it never gets dull, and the beacon missions you complete do a fine job in not only getting the best utility out of the Solar Surfer, but also using the environment of the given area to its best potential.
Now, here's where things get a little interesting, because it honestly feels like the Solar Surfer is both the best and the worst thing about the entire game.
A few of you might already know what I'm getting at with this, but a lot of it does come down to control. It's honestly not that the controls are bad per se, it's more just that some levels do a better job of working with those controls than others. In the first few levels, the Surfer seems to be just about perfect, with good control over speed, intuitive handling, and obstacles that let you take advantage of the ability to lower your sail and squeeze through small areas, jumping over large areas, and overall offering a fun sense of speed and excitement. But as the game continues, it becomes increasingly apparent that this is because of the design of those early levels themselves, as the early levels were structured in ways that complemented the handling of the Solar Surfer to give the player a smooth and fun experience, but levels that appear later on in the game aren't quite so graceful about this. Corners are hard to take, level structure gets confusing, and you can find yourself lost in the areas that look way too similar to one another, and death can come far too easily. The worst offender by far is the Meteor Belt, the Solar Surfer level based around the supernova. You're falling off the side or into lava all the time. Some of these jumps are so precise to make. The ring race missions can bite me, and I spent close to an hour just trying to finish getting all these dumb little green energies because I kept losing track of where they all were, and every time I died, the search started all over again. This level can get lost. Visually, it's amazing, but man was it a pain to play through. Still, it's not all sour. The final level of the game is nice because it feels like it's actually structured much better for the Solar Surfer, and there aren't even any beacons to activate here. Your only objective is just to make it to the end of the level. It was very straightforward and felt appropriate for the conclusion of an adventure. There's also 2 boss battles in the game that are required to complete before the player can progress past them, and they're fine. They're not great or anything, but they work. I think the fight with Scroop fares a little better, with some interesting visuals going on in the background and some decent attack patterns to work with, but the one with Silver goes between these weird phases of either being dull or just being frustrating. That, and I think it just lasts for too long. Now, if you went the extra mile and decided to 100% the game, Treasure Planet does have a little bit to offer you. You get a brand new title and level select screen to show off, which I think is a nice touch, and you even get to see the little nicknames given to all the enemies and NPCs in... I'm sorry, what? Tortilla Flats. Everyone else has a name that makes some tiny level of sense, but Tortilla Flats? Legend tells of a fearsome buccaneer, feared by every pirate and sailor among the stars. Tortilla Flats. Look, this guy is even in the movie, right there in the prologue. He's not joining in with the other pirates, he's not swinging in with them because he's commanding them. Tortilla Flats was the true villain of this universe. Or, you know, it's just a stupid name given to a character that does not matter in the least. Anyway, let's go back to talking about the game's controls, specifically for Jim himself. He handles rather well for the most part, but he's not exactly perfect. While his moves are very similar to those of Jack, his weight feels a bit different, and there are times where Jim feels ever so slightly sluggish. It's not not enough to destroy the entire experience or anything, but it's worth mentioning that it takes some getting used to. That being said, the platforming in the game is actually pretty solid, and simply progressing through the environments, collecting gold, and beating up enemies all feel pretty good, and that's about as much as I could ask for. The camera seems to operate fine too, and I can't really say that I ran into any real issues with it, but snapping the camera to face whatever's in front of Jim is a little jarring. It just cuts straight to a new camera angle, and it's just a bit too fast. Honestly, it's a little disorienting when you're in the moment. I mean, just look at games like Super Mario 64 or Ocarina of Time. When you readjust the camera, it sweeps over to a new position in a full motion, helping you keep track of where you are. This is a small complaint, but still, details like that do matter. But attention was still paid to the other details in the game, especially with the presentation. I wish I could have gotten footage that's a bit cleaner to show it off, but emulating PlayStation 2 games on my computer is rough at best, and I don't see myself having the cash to blow on something like a FrameMeister to capture clean analog footage in my lifetime. So unfortunately, I'm stuck with this roundabout setup for game consoles that don't have an HDMI output. Still though, you can see how the visuals of the game were given a pretty nice amount of care, with a great sense of atmosphere added to each location. The spaceport levels are some of my favorites to look at, and I think the game as a whole has a fun sense of adventure that really captivates you and makes you want to explore. Character models are a different story though. They're animated fine enough, but in terms of their builds, it's messy. Some characters look better than others, sure, but characters like Scroop and Silver seem to suffer the most. At least the voice performances are solid. Much of the cast from the film return here, even with Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Jim. I can't say much about the writing though, because these characters don't have a lot of interesting stuff to say. There are a handful of fun interactions, like Dr. Doppler just being a huge dork, and Captain Amelia revealing that she used to ride a Solar Surfer of her own when she was younger, but there really isn't a lot of that sort of thing here, and certainly nothing on the level of Jim and Silver's interactions in the film. I get it, it's a rushed licensed game, and 3D platformers aren't exactly known for their Oscar-worthy plots, but I can think of a few choice games of that era in the same genre that did a better job at adding some characterization to its cast.
We won't find any more of that dark gooey eco stuff, will we? Cause I'd hate to fall in again and turn into you.
Say what again? I dare you. I double dare you.
That's certainly not to say there isn't any enthusiasm coming from any of these characters, because I don't think I've ever seen a game character as excited about accomplishing a mission as Jim Hawkins. Every time you activate a beacon, Jim just screams his praises to the heavens like it is the most monumental event of his life, and it's honestly hilarious.
What makes it even better though is something that happened to me while I was recording footage for this review. See, I don't have the same copy of this game that I did for my childhood, so I had to replace it with a used copy. Unfortunately, I've had a really hard time finding copies of this game that aren't damaged, but this disc does seem to work well for the most part. Except for one level in particular that the PlayStation 2 just does not seem to like reading very much, which led to some audio skipping. And I'm pretty sure this is the sound that's played at the gates of hell.
Lastly, let's talk about the music of the game, because it's one of my favorite parts of this whole package. Licensed games have a pretty bad reputation for being rushed, messy, and cheap, but this team did not skimp out when it came to composing some great music for the experience. It sounds so faithful to the tone and atmosphere of the universe it's set in, and lends to the atmosphere in each area tremendously well. Sometimes I find myself playing this soundtrack in the background while I'm editing or working on projects because it just puts me in a good mood. Honestly, some of these tracks sound like they took some very specific inspiration from the movie's official score. There was some genuine effort put into this, and I have real respect for that. You can tell that Bizarre Creations weren't just phoning it in on this one.
So, do I recommend Treasure Planet for the PlayStation 2?
I do. It's really not all that hard to find a copy these days, as I see them running for about $2 to $4 in local used game stores, but they do have that frustrating tendency to be pretty scratched up in my experience. Still, if you manage to land a working copy, you could do a lot worse than this. Sure, it's not without blemish. It's pretty derivative of other games, and some of those Solar Surfer levels really do put a hamper on things, but the ability to skip certain missions and even entire levels you don't like helps out a lot. It's not perfect, but if you're any kind of fan of the movie, you'll get a real kick out of Treasure Planet.
The PlayStation 2 wasn't the only platform to get a Treasure Planet game, as there were also games developed for the PlayStation 1, the Game Boy Advance, and even 2 games on the PC, but we're going to try tackling those another day. I'll tell you right now that the game on the PlayStation 2 is the one most worth your time, and honestly, there's one game in particular of this group that I think deserves a video of its own for various reasons, but we're going to have to try tackling this universe again one day in the future. Until then, my lovely viewers, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next mission.
Thank you for playing. Would you like to try again?